This is the image of a supposedly happy family. But behind closed doors, Darren and Charla Mack's relationship slowly changed from explosive to toxic beyond salvation. And once legal teams became involved, this relationship became extremely dangerous for the both of them, until one day, everything would snap. What happened to the Mack family? Were the actions which followed planned? And who is to blame? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're going to look at the slippery case of Darren Mack. Now this case is a wild one. With swingers, fortune, divorce, and even a sniper rifle thrown into the mix, this story pretty much has it all. And hey, but just to let you know, I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases here on a weekly basis. So if that's of interest to you, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So please, grab yourself a coffee and sit back. This is the case of Darren Mack. A vibrant city found in a flat desert and surrounded by mountains. You'd be forgiven for thinking this was Las Vegas. But despite sharing the same state, Reno and Sin City are on opposite sides of Nevada. Welcome to Reno, folks. Nicknamed as the biggest little city in the world, it is famous for its flashing neon lights, casinos, and museums, and will soon be host to the largest building in the world, with thanks to the ongoing production of Tesla's Gigafactory. For many decades, Reno's economy has primarily been driven by gambling and tourism. But with the introduction of Tesla and many other tech companies, this may all change in the future. At least for now, it is still well known for its gambling and was once deemed to be the world's divorce capital. Something that, unfortunately, Reno does in fact live up to in this case. Found within the city's borders, we find the home of young beauty Charla Sampsel. Born on August 15th, 1966, she spent most of her younger years at Reno High School, where she made many friends and achieved a decent set of grades. Even as a child, Charla had big dreams. According to a friend, and more than anything else, she wanted to be famous. In her late teenage years, Charla left Reno behind to move to Los Angeles, where she then managed to appear in a couple of films and a documentary. But blowing up in the movie industry is very tough, and eventually Charla realised this. And so, while still in her 20s, she gave up on her dream and moved back to Reno, Nevada. Reshuffling her priorities to live a more comfortable and realistic life, Charla at first found it very difficult to settle down into a less ambitious lifestyle. Despite giving up on her acting career, she still wanted the money, the fame, and the attention. Which, let's be honest, wasn't going to happen between the small jobs that she jumped between. But the course of Charla's life would forever change when, one day, she locked eyes with a somewhat charming man who went by the name of Darren Mack. Darren Mack was a handsome and successful businessman. Born on January 31st, 1961, he was also raised in Nevada by his mother Sloan and father. The Mack family were different to the usual. They were actually distinctively wealthy, with thanks to his parents owning one of the largest pawn shops in Reno. And Darren, he was the oldest son who would one day inherit their kingdom. Moving through his young adulthood, Darren also graduated from Reno High School, before attending the University of Nevada on a baseball scholarship. And while doing this, he became more and more involved with the family's business. But at the age of 25, and in the year 1986, tragedy would strike the Macks in a rather unusual fashion. His father was unfortunately killed in a plane crash, leaving Darren, his mother, and his brother with a great deal of emotional turmoil. But alongside this devastating news, a window of opportunity opened up for Darren. At long last, he became the half-owner of the family business, which, at the time, was estimated to be worth over $10 million. Over the following years, Darren continued to expand his role in the family's business, and in fact, he had a profoundly positive impact on their financials. During this time, he continued to indulge in a life of luxury and extravagance, blowing tens of thousands of dollars on parties, watches, and cars. He would also fall in love and marry Deborah Ashlock in 1986, where the two would then go on to have a son and a daughter together. But by the year 1991 had come around, the two had unfortunately divorced. And just a few years after this, Darren would of course meet Charla. Now, from the very beginning, friends claimed that the strong chemistry between Charla and Darren was in fact undeniable. They seemed to be a perfect match for one another, and they were extremely passionate. Personalities aside, Darren's lifestyle and money were a great match for Charla too. He was able to afford whatever she wanted, and this would come into play very quickly. Not only were Charla and Darren very quick to move in together, but they would also marry in a very quick manner too. Within 1 year of finding each other, Charla had become Mrs. Mack. From here on out, and at least to family and friends, the married couple were quite simply unstoppable. They were full of love, hopes and dreams, and of course, they were filthy rich. Along with Darren's children from his former marriage, the four lived together in a $1.6 million home in Washoe Valley, where Darren drove a Hummer and Charla drove a Lexus. Charla would work with Darren in his pawn shop, further propping up his financial empire, and in their downtime, they embarked on luxurious holidays together. Darren and Charla played their part in being good parents to their 2 children, and in the background, they would also work at local charity events, where Darren also ran seminars in self-improvement, further propping up a facade of a perfect family. It is easy to see why that, from the outside, the Mack family were envied for so many reasons. But the Macks had a very indulgent side too. Darren and Charla were actually in an open marriage, frequently attended swingers parties, and were well known in the strip clubs around Reno. Now, if it worked for Darren and Charla, then good for them. And although this arrangement would work in the beginning, that would all eventually change. Shortly into their marriage, Darren and Charla would have their first child together. Their daughter, Erica, was born 3 days before Christmas, on December the 22nd, 1997. The family's dynamics would change fairly swiftly after this. With the introduction of their first child, Charla had second thoughts about their open marriage. I mean, sure, they did have their fun, but now things were getting serious. She wanted the extra level of commitment from Darren, but this wasn't something he was happy to give. Other differences, such as those between their personalities, came to light, and this is where our story today begins to go downhill. Disagreements turned into arguments, arguments into shouting, and shouting into physical violence. And some of these actions were in full public display at home and at work. Charla sought comfort from her friends, admitting that Darren had started to physically and verbally attack her. All in the meanwhile, Darren's diary recalls moments of Charla kicking him in the balls, keying his car, and yelling at him over the phone. These altercations became so severe that Darren eventually moved out of their $1.6 million family home to live in the nearby luxury condominium. And soon after this, both he and Charla were in constant fear of each other. Apparently, Darren would carry a gun in fear that she was going to kill him. And as for Charla, she had apparently already been grabbed by the neck and strangled numerous times. Safe to say, this intense and passionate relationship had nosedived to become extremely toxic. By February of 2005, the couple had reached a breaking point. It was in this month that Charla officially filed for a divorce. And unfortunately, it would introduce one great point of contention. Of course, I'm talking about money. You see, Darren and Charla were making lots of money together, but the business itself belonged to Darren, and he had fired Charla. This means that despite Darren making over $40,000 per month, Charla was unemployed and earning nothing. So, this is where I must introduce our third and final character to the story. You see, with a relationship so violent and volatile, both Darren and Charla were not going to leave without a fight, and this remained all the same with divorce proceedings. Charla wanted to claim as much financial support as possible from Darren, whereas Darren, on the other hand, claimed he had no money to spare, and he refused to give any to Charla. So a family court judge was therefore selected and appointed to their case, and this judge would have the overruling say on their divorce conditions. So with that said, our third key character to this case, family court judge Chuck Weller. With over 20 years of experience as an attorney, Chuck made the move in 2004 to become a court judge overseeing family cases. He was a long-term servant of the judicial system and had a clean track record as an attorney. But when he was put onto the case of Darren and Charla's divorce settlement, he was only several months into his new role. This left him slightly inexperienced, and furthermore, he was allegedly known to show a slight bias in his cases. Darren was straight out of luck here, as after reviewing the case, Chuck Weller ordered Darren to pay Charla $10,849 per month until the divorce was settled. This was on the basis that Charla was unemployed, and Darren himself was making more than quadruple this figure every month. Now, as expected, Darren wasn't happy about this at all. And not only would he refuse to make these payments, but he also took this case to local media in an effort to gain public support. He would even go on to describe Chuck as an abusive and tyrannous man.
People that have never experienced this, it sounds almost like you're trying to tell a story about how Martians have landed, because it sounds so unbelievable unless you've actually been in it or been around his courtroom. But if you check on the internet, there's many like myself that have been fallen prey to his tyranny and his abuse in his courtroom. I can't even speak of what the cost will be from the retaliation that I'll get from the court system of Chuck Weller. It's even going through it, it's hard to keep your mind around that this kind of tyranny and this kind of injustice could happen in the United States. It just doesn't make any sense.
Throughout the following months, Charla's financial figures quickly slipped into the negatives, and as she found herself falling apart in debt, Darren was flying to luxurious resorts in Mexico with his new girlfriends. The legal proceedings to their divorce settlement dragged on for a total of 15 months, and in this time frame, multiple lawsuits and many serious allegations were thrown between both parties. Seriously, this case was a total shitstorm, and by May of 2006, Chuck Weller clearly had enough. He figured if these two were not able to come to their own conclusion, he would take matters into his own hands. And eventually, Chuck did just that. He mandated child custody right down the middle, ruling that their child Erica would spend alternating weeks between Darren and Charla. When it came to financials, Darren would once again, in his mind, draw the short straw. He was ordered to pay Charla a total of $480,000 within the next 48 hours. And in addition to this, Darren was also ordered to pay an additional $500,000 in monthly installments of $10,000 over the next 50 months. This would leave Charla just shy of $1 million. He was also ordered to reimburse Charla $15,000 for the spousal support payments that he'd missed in previous months. Following Chuck's ruling, Darren was furious with the outcome. And I mean, granted, Charla wasn't too happy either, but Darren was clearly the one to be enraged with the situation. Even still, no one, and honestly, I mean no one, expected what was to happen next. June the 12th, 2006. The time was 11 AM, and being a Monday, most of those in downtown Reno were back at work after a usual summer weekend. That is when, in the heart of Reno and along Sierra Street, a sudden gunshot echoed through the air. Those in the immediate vicinity rushed indoors to seek cover, while others called 911 to report a potential shooter in the area.
I think there's going to be a sniper in a parking garage. There's been a gunshot. One of the judges has been shot.
It soon became apparent that the noise heard was indeed a gunshot. Those near the Truckee River could see a broken window from the Reno Muni Court, and those situated northbound recalled gunfire coming from the parking gallery car park. For those inside the Reno Muni Court building, the event was even more obvious. A family court judge had been shot, and the judge was no other than Chuck Weller. Hundreds of officers shut down the area around Sierra Street, as SWAT teams spread out in desperate search for a sniper on the run. All in the meanwhile, civilians hid in local shops, restaurants, and other buildings. But as the downtown shooting gripped the attention of law enforcement and the public, there were other sinister actions which had taken place in the shadows. Travelling back 2 hours before the sniper attack, which was at 9 AM, Charla had taken her daughter Erica to Wilbur May Parkway to drop her daughter off at Darren's condominium. Monday was the day that the two parents swapped custody over Erica, and so, as the two arrived, Erica made her way upstairs to meet Darren's friend and housemate Daniel Osborne, this leaving her parents, Darren and Charla, downstairs by the driveway. Darren had politely asked Daniel if he could drive Erica to her grandmother's house that day, as unfortunately, Darren had several things to take care of, and Daniel kindly agreed. But as Daniel and Erica were catching up, a sudden shriek rang through the air. Hearing it a second time, the two of them were able to conclude that it was the sound of Daniel's dog yelping from the garage. Daniel slowly walked downstairs to investigate, and that is when Darren made his own way through the garage door. He brushed past Daniel with a weird look on his face. He remained silent, and a towel was wrapped around his hand. Just moments after this, Daniel's dog ran through the garage door, and he was covered in blood. But one quick glance over this, and Daniel was able to tell that his dog was thankfully okay. However, that could only mean one thing. All of this blood was coming from something or someone else. In this moment, he realised that Charla was nowhere to be found, and this was despite her car still remaining on the driveway. Daniel didn't dare check the garage. A very sudden fear overcame him. He ran back upstairs, found Erica, and said, "We have to leave." They jumped into Daniel's car and drove away. Calling the police about 2 hours later, officers would, unfortunately, take a while to arrive at Wilbur May Parkway. With the potential sniper attack unfolding downtown, law enforcement's main priority was focused on capturing the suspected gunman. But eventually, as officers looked around the property, they discovered 3 droplets of blood on Darren Mack's driveway, and more specifically, they were near the garage door. With no response from within the property, officers stormed the condominium, and behind the garage door lay a very gruesome scene. They found the lifeless body of Charla Mack, and tragically, she had been stabbed several times in the neck. One notable detail is that she wasn't wearing any socks or shoes. Venturing inside, a search of Darren's condo revealed more incriminating evidence. This included a note which appeared to be a step-by-step guide for killing Charla, and police would also find a rental contract for a silver Ford Explorer. It didn't take long for officers to realise that both Chuck and Charla were connected to a man no other than Darren Mack, and once they realised this, they were very keen to find him. Police officers reviewing surveillance footage near Chuck's office found that at 10:41 AM, just 20 minutes before Chuck was shot, a silver Ford Explorer entered the suspected car park across the river. And just after the time that Chuck Weller had been shot, this same Ford Explorer was spotted leaving. With Charla's death, Chuck's grave injuries, this surveillance footage, and the receipt, officers were now confident that Darren Mack had something to do with all of this. Within hours, news had spread like wildfire that Darren was now the prime suspect in both of these attacks. And furthermore, the FBI had given him pole position on their most wanted list online. Described as a bodybuilder and hunter with access to all types of weapons, he was considered to be armed and dangerous. But Darren, he was nowhere to be found. And simply put, he had vanished. So, the nationwide manhunt for Darren Mack had finally begun. But by the time that officers had realised that he was their prime suspect, he was long gone. Data forensics confirmed that Darren's mobile phone pinged a cell tower in Boomtown at 11:19 AM, then again in Verdi 6 minutes later, and again in Truckee several minutes after that. It seemed as if Darren had fled westward out of Nevada. In an effort to throw authorities off his tail, Darren used one of his corporate credit cards at Sacramento International Airport. He then jumped back into his hired vehicle and travelled south to the Mexico border, where he then ditched the Ford Explorer and took a bus to La Paz, a town found near the southern tip of the Bahia Peninsula. Darren then returned to one of his favourite luxury resorts nearby in San Jose del Cabo, and acted as if nothing had happened. He did, however, use a fake name. Reno investigators, who were closely working with the FBI, were able to track Darren across several resorts in Mexico. But Darren, he always remained one step ahead of them. Throughout the following days, Darren made several attempts to sleep with women, which turned heads and caused tension. He would also write several letters to himself and his friends, in which he said, "I am a martyr for the Father's Day rights movement. Remember, they want me as a sacrificial lamb. They want the pleasure of executing me. My story must get attention, in order to save the hundreds of thousands yet to go through little Nazi Germany in the divorce industry." Of course, rather than sober up to the realization that he had killed his wife, he instead victimized himself. But exactly 1 week after Darren had fled to Mexico, both logic and reasonability seemed to get the better of him. It was in this moment that he called one of his best friends at home to offer his surrender. It would take 4 long days of negotiating before he finally revealed himself. On June the 22nd, 11 days after murdering Charla Mack and attempting to murder Chuck Weller, Darren Mack surrendered himself to authorities. He was carrying $36,000 in cash, 20 credit cards, and a suitcase full of evidence. A pair of bloody shoes, along with other items of clothing, were found within his suitcase. and as expected, this blood matched the DNA profile of Charla Mack. However, there is one positive detail to this case. Family court judge Chuck Weller would thankfully survive the attack, and over the following months, he would make a full recovery. Darren was able to land a 150-meter shot on Chuck, but the bullet had penetrated his upper chest just below his shoulder, missing all vital organs. Moving into the legal proceedings of this case, Darren Mack was defended by Scott Freeman and famous attorney David Chesnoff. Due to Darren's former ties with Chuck Weller, the entire Washoe County bench were disqualified from participating in all civil cases against Darren, and therefore Darren Mack's trial was moved to Las Vegas. During his trial, Darren claimed that his wife was both mentally unstable and abusive. Allegedly, he had killed Charla out of self-defense. He claimed that on the morning that she was killed, she had punched the back of his head before drawing a gun on him. The gun then failed to fire, and Darren retaliated with a knife. Darren also claimed that after being forced to kill Charla, he was in a severe state of shock, and was therefore legally insane during his attempt to kill Chuck. On November 5, 2007, Darren pleaded guilty to first-degree murder over the death of his estranged wife, Charla Mack. He also entered an Alford plea to the attempted murder of Chuck Weller. For those unaware, an Alford plea is where the defendant does not admit to the crime, and they insist that they are innocent. But they do however admit that the evidence presented in court is likely to persuade a judge or jury to their convictions. In typical man-child fashion, Darren then attempted to withdraw these pleas. He then claimed that he was coerced into pleading guilty by his own attorneys, and also claimed that his signature was forged. But the judge would deny Darren's motions, and essentially tell him to shut up.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give is correct, to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat in the
Darren, how do you feel about the death of Charla?
How do I feel about it? I feel about that whole events for that day is it's a tremendous tragedy. I mean, the impact of this, my little girl doesn't have a mother. My two children who loved her and still do with all their heart don't have a stepmother. Like I said, when Charla was in her upbeat, great, normal state, she was, you would want to be her friend.
Right.
A lot of people don't recognize this. I lost a wife too. And even though that this happened, I still loved Charla. I just couldn't live with her and I was afraid of her. If that telling the truth to the jury got me convicted, then that's the truth. I would have never choreographed the whole damn day. If you can't win it on the facts, might as well lie. It's kind of the philosophy here, it seems like. Why not just present the facts to a jury? Look, you want to do something? Give me a jury trial, Mr. Lally, and I'll stipulate if I lose, I'll take the death penalty, okay?
Object. Entertain the objection. That'll be stricken.
Under the previous terms of the plea agreement, Darren was sentenced to life in prison for murdering Charla. He was also given the maximum sentence for the attempted murder of Judge Weller, which resulted in 40 years behind bars, with eligibility for parole after 16 years. These sentences run consecutively, which means Darren Mack will be eligible for parole in the year 2042. This means he can't taste freedom until the ripe old age of 82. Since his conviction, Darren has made several appeals, including one in 2010, 2011, and as recent as 2018. But so far, all appeals have been denied. Darren's son, Jory Mack, who is now an adult, now fights for his father and claims that Darren is partially innocent.
Start putting those puzzle pieces together, you see an entirely different picture.
This case is a turbulent one. An explosive and passionate marriage ended in a bitter divorce, and both Charla and Darren seem to promote further violence against one another. But the difference here is that Charla lost her life, and her child now has no mother or father. And although there is no proof that Charla intended to kill Darren, there is proof that it had crossed his mind. Money seemed to be the main motive behind Darren's actions, which in a roundabout way is counterintuitive, as now he has none of it. And even worse, Charla is no more. As usual with cases involving homicide, everyone was a loser here. Charla lost her life, Darren lost his freedom, their 3 kids lost their parents, and both families lost a member. And surprise, surprise, all of this was over money. That just about wraps up today's case, folks. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. So, what are your thoughts on the case of Darren Mack? Did he have no choice but to retaliate against Charla's actions? Or was all of this cold-blooded murder? Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And as always folks, I'll be back again real soon for another video. But until that moment arrives, please remember to stay safe and look after each other. Thank you, and goodbye.